thank you for switching on the camera. Can see already some lovely faces. Hello and welcome. Oh, hello, Mr. Vedrin. I'm happy that you can join us. Hello, good morning. So then we have all our guest speakers, and I suggest that we can start. And I give the floor to Mr. Malus.
Okay, I don't know if you see me. Everybody see me? Yes, Julia.
We cannot hear you, or at least I cannot hear you. I don't know whether the others can hear you.
It's no problem for me.
I personally can hear him.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Can you see me?
Yes. All good.
Okay. Okay. That's always problem. No, thank you very much for this availability in these days. Very complicated for German and Belgian colleagues, and anyway, in some other countries, very hot. But it's a hot topic, as Julia said. So, hot conditions for hot topics. So my idea is just to make a very short introduction. Why we choose with Vocal Europe, his director, Mr. Isik, or research policy advisor Julia here, which will be the moderator, and then myself as chairman of Vocal Europe. Why we choose the topic? We choose the topic not to speak about what happened in the last 2-3 years, but the EU-Russian relation, which everybody is aware, but to see beyond, to see what can come next. And I will just start this webinar by two reflections before we listen to Julia and to the speakers. This first reflection is just an anecdote. Something like 20 years ago, I was in Brussels and talking to Mr. Prodi. Romano Prodi was president of the European Commission, and he was just telling, not just to me, but some of us, an anecdote that he had a visit of Vladimir Putin during his first mandate as president of the Russian Federation. At that time, it was quite turfing. Each year, at least, Mr. Putin was traveling to Brussels, or there were EU-Russia summit. And Mr. Prodi told us the following anecdote, that Mr. Putin coming to his office saying, Mr. Prodi, what will you say if I have in my bag with me an application to join the European Union? So Mr. Prodi took that, of course, as a joke, as a kind of not provocation, but the way. But at that time, I think this perspective seemed to be not realistic, but seemed to have a sense. Russia is mainly European countries. It was a time where we had a democratic transition in Russia, and everything seemed possible. Even I remember the College of Europe of Bruges opened at request of Mr. Putin, a filial by MGIMO, Diplomatic Academy. I was teaching there, so I know, to train, to prepare the Russian diplomatic elite about what is the European Union. This seems to today to be so far in the past. So what's at that time we had some perspective of closer relation, and we see the situation today. We just speak about sanctions and Cold War. And when I look also to be my second perspective, at the relation, for example, the European Union can have with China. China cannot be described as a model of democratic country, and we had what happened in the last month and years with Hong Kong, despite the promise of the Chinese communist leadership of one country, two system, and we have today one country, one system, and now speaking about the Uyghurs, Tibetan, and others. And then the European Union has signed, has negotiated a big investment, economic trade agreement with China. What's about relation with Turkey? But if we compare with Russia, we see that Russia is just sanctions, division, attacks, aggression on verbals, of course, but as you say, very cool, very cool. So what could be the perspective despite whatever regime will be in Russia? What could be the perspective? What could we say for the future? Not for the past, but for the future, or what kind of relation could be developed between the European Union and Russia? So this is the aim of this webinar. I think we have very distinguished speakers, and I hope we will come to some, not solution, but some ideas, some reflection to prepare, I hope, a better future for EU and Russian relations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Molos, for your welcoming remarks, and of course, also a very warm welcome from my side. I'm Julia, I'm a policy researcher at Vocal Europe, and I will guiding you through this webinar today, through this conference. I will make it a very short introduction, just pointing out some things that Mr. Molos already mentioned. So it has been reiterated now many times that EU-Russia relations are, yes, at an all-time low. And while it is also widely acknowledged that the cooperation with Russia is needed and necessary as we face common challenges in many dossiers, so for instance, saving the Iran nuclear deal, the dossier of Syria, or also on a global scale when we talk about climate change. And yet the EU and the member states, they remain deeply divided with its approach towards Moscow, and actually struggles to bring Russia back to the table. We've had the last report of the Commission, also the summit of the European Council in June, and both of them have portrayed how difficult still EU-Russia relations are. As Mr. Molos already mentioned, the last headlines were rather about sanctions and retortions, and the last Franco-German initiative to actually re-engage with Moscow through constructive dialogue got largely refuted at the summit. So what are the prospects of the EU-Russia relations? Yes, the headline said, are we sliding into a new Cold War? Maybe we can talk about that as well today. And I'm very much looking forward to the expertise about the expert input that we have. So thank you very much for the guest speakers, which I will now present very shortly. Once again, thank you very much for coming. And I will start with Mr. Andreas Kubilius. Thank you very much for being here today. So you've been a member of European Parliament since 2019. You're a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, and a member of the delegation to Ukraine. You are also the Parliament's rapporteur on Russia. And before your election to the EP, you've been a very active figure in Lithuanian politics, because you've been a member of the Parliament, of the Seimas, and leader of the Lithuanian Christian Democrats, and you served as Prime Minister of Lithuania twice. So thank you very much for being here, very much looking forward to your contribution. Then I very much welcome also Ambassador Igor Sherbak. He is Honorary Ambassador of the Russian Federation and a leading associate of the Department of European Security at the Institute of Europe of the Russian Academy of Science. Throughout your diplomatic career, you have distinguished yourself in various positions. You've been first deputy to the Russian permanent representation, to the permanent representative to the UN in New York, dealing with UN Security Council, or you've also been deputy director of the Department of International Organizations of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, amongst many other things, of course. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks a lot.
Then it's a pleasure again to have Ambassador Delcourt here with us. Welcome to you as well. He is an honorary ambassador of Belgium, guest professor at the Université catholique de Louvain, and member of the Académie royale de Belgique and the l'Académie des sciences d'outre-mer. You have also distinguished yourself throughout your diplomatic career in many former positions, such as Minister Counselor at the UN or the USCE, and you've been also ambassador to Sweden, Poland, and Canada. And in your research, you focus on a variety of topics in EU affairs, multilateral negotiation, and the evolution of Western diplomacy. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Then as our fourth guest speaker today, we have Ambassador Franco. Welcome to you. He's an honorary ambassador of the EU and senior associate research fellow at the Egmont Royal Institute for International Relations. You have also had an impressive diplomatic career. You've been head of the European Union delegation to Egypt, and also head of the European Commission delegation to Russia. And in your research, you focus also on EU diplomacy, Russia, but also North Africa and the Middle East. And of course, last but of course not least, Monsieur Olivier Védrine, welcome to you. It's a pleasure to have you here. He's a political scientist, journalist, and TV anchor. He worked many years in Russia. He was the chief editor of the Russian version of the French National Defense Review. And since 2016, he's the chief editor of the Russian Monitor, one of the sites of the Russian opposition. And you're also director of a civil rights movement, New Europeans, which is based in Brussels. Moreover, you're also the president of the Global Transformation Academy in Kiev. So we have many very super interesting political personalities. Thank you very much to all the guest speakers who signed up. I'm truly delighted that you're here with us today. So once again, for all the participants, please switch on your camera so that we can also see you. And yeah, we will now start with our guest speakers' contribution. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Kubilius. The stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Julia. Thanks a lot, and really pleasure to be part of this very important seminar. I will try to be, as brief as possible. Really, you mentioned that I am from Lithuania. Some, European experts are saying that, well, those Baltics are total Russophobes. I would try to oppose such a conclusion in a very clear way, since, we have the strongest interest to have good relations with Russia, being in the neighborhood of Russia. And simply, our history teaches us that when we have bad relations with Russia, usually we were suffering. The last time when we had bad relations with Russia and Russia was suffering, that was in 1600, when we were sending our troops with Dmitry, to Kremlin. After that, usually we were suffering. So that's our interest. Conditions of relations of EU and Russia for time being really are not good. And the question is again very famous from Russian, literature: who is guilty and what to do? I would say that really, we're facing of course, in a recent Russian history during the last 30 years, we're facing different, stages of Russia development. One stage was democratic Russia with Yeltsin. Another stage is with Putin, who is really perhaps cannot be called a democrat. And good relations with Russia, in my opinion, depends very much on, how and when Russia will be able to come back to transform itself to democratic way of development. That is a most important condition. So in European Parliament, we recently finished our work on special report on EU political relations with Russia. AFET voted with a big majority last week. Very soon, today or in few days' time, version of that report will be published. And we are, of course, critical on administration of President Putin, but we are optimistic about future of Russia. And that is where, perhaps it's some kind of new language which we are trying to speak out. Since we believe that Russia can become a democracy like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, we understand, some kind of historical difficulties of Russia development for time being. Russia is the last, empire on the European continent, which is going through some difficult psychological, political, and whatever, dismantle of that imperial past. Usually empires, when they are collapsing, they are facing some very, 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 very painful difficulties. And especially in the countries which were not, which had no democratic, experience, the democracy perhaps is not able to stay in such countries for a long period of time. But democracies also have the habit to evolve in some way of waves of democratization. And, as the famous American political scientist Samuel Huntington, was writing in his very famous book, said, we are the product of the Baltic democracies and Central Europe democracies. We are the products of the third wave, and we can hope that next waves also will come, and that Russia will be able to transform itself into democracy, like Ukraine, like Moldova, Georgia did, and like Belarusian people now are trying also to win the same, victory for their democracy. So, what's our view on how things can develop and what kind of strategy EU needs to have? We are saying in a very simple way: EU needs to look how to assist Russian people in that transformation, and using some very clear policy instruments. And here's what we agree with Joseph Borrell, that EU strategy needs to be based on 3 pillars: push back, contain, and engage. Push back, on external aggressive behavior of Russia. Contain, hybrid threats, which for time being, Kremlin administration is trying to use, both, in its neighborhood, but also in more broadly in all European or even in the United States. And engage, but on the terminology of engage, we have a little bit different again, understanding that yes, we need to engage with Kremlin on some issues which are really important, like climate change or some other issues. But also we need to engage much more strategically with pro-democratic Russian forces, having in mind really that we can assist Russia transformation. Russia really will face some big challenges looking into the future, especially when we're talking about energy, which is still the basis for Russian exports and Russian economy. We see that Green Deal implementation can make big difference. European implementation of Green Deal can make a big difference, since for time being exports of gas and oil into Europe are, it's around 60% of all the exports which Russia is exporting to EU. EU is too heavily dependent on Russian gas. At the time being, it's around 50% of all the gas which is used in Europe is coming from Russia. With a Green Deal, at least what we see from Commission predictions, somewhere around, after 2030, those numbers will go down by 60 or 70%. So that is what can change also dramatically situation in Russia itself. And that is where really both we and Russia needs to be prepared for some deep transformation. So what we are proposing, really, again, on engagement with pro-democratic Russia, of course, we need to be effective in defending Russian people's rights for democracy and in general for human rights, which is unfortunate development we see recently. As an example, what is happening with Navalny and people around. Second, what we see also that success, what EU can do, it's to strengthen its policy towards major Eastern Partnership countries, especially for Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, because success of those countries and especially success of Ukraine can be an inspiration for the Russian people, as we see also it became inspiration for Belarusian people. And that success can be built with more clear and more ambitious integration policy. And the last point, what we propose really, what EU can do now, it's really to develop and to announce a very clear strategy of relations with a future democratic Russia. How we are, imagine what kind of relationship I have in mind, free trade, visa-free, strategic partnerships for modernization or whatever, how we imagine our relations with democratic Russia when that transformation in Russia will happen, because again, we believe in some kind of historical tendencies that Russia, as Ukraine and also Belarus can become a democracy, and that is what will bring different future for the whole European continent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kubilius, for your input. I just wanted to point out that, of course, you are all very most welcome to ask questions to our speakers. But we have I can already see raising hands. We have a Q&A session at the very end. So I would ask you to either write the questions in the chat and I will collect them and ask them on your behalf if you prefer. Otherwise, of course, you can also ask them yourselves, but yes, at the end. Yeah, thank you. And then I'm delighted to give the floor now to Ambassador Igor Sherbak. Thanks.
Yes.
You're still muted, Ambassador Sherbak. Now, yes.
It's okay.
Now it's good. Perfect. We can hear you.
Yes. So I would like to thank you for arranging this webinar, which is really important in our time, in time of, you see, dramatic changes, not only in Europe, but elsewhere also in the world. I would like to tell that my impression with this naming of our webinar. So I have an impression that we are still gazing towards the past, but not towards the future. And my preference is to call this conference EU-Russia relationship beyond 2021 and beyond, towards a new dialogue, not towards a Cold War, but a new dialogue. And it would be in tune with the recent statement of Chancellor Merkel and President of France for resuming a dialogue between the EU and the Russian Federation. I think this is the motto of the time. And I'm sure that this is absolute priority for us. And we expect a lot in terms of movement in this direction on both sides. I would like to tell that, of course, one of our colleagues enumerated the, let's say, the principles of engagement with the Russian Federation: push back, contain, and engage. And my preference is to leave only engage. It would be more productive and it would be more constructive. If you remember, there were recent statements of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs concerning the relationship with the European Union, and it was admitted and the serious concerns were expressed on the fact that mechanisms of cooperation were totally destroyed during last time. It's unfortunate development, and lacking of these instruments and mechanism. I would like to enumerate what kind of mechanism. This is regular summits and consultations, intergovernmental consultations between the European Union and the Russian Federation. And absence of this mechanism from the in diplomatic fora creates a lot of complexities and difficulties. And I think the priority number one is to resurrect this mechanism and make them alive. And this is very important, but we need these instruments for starting constructive dialogue. Not only technical dialogue, which still exists between the European Union and the Russian Federation, technical dialogue on many issues but I mean a political dialogue on security questions, on political relationship between the European Union and the Russian Federation. In the document of on the report of the Commission, I think it contains some positive elements concerning engagement on some technical issues, on environmental questions, on public health, on trade, economy, on the cross-border pollution, sustainable forest management, fighting forest fires, and successful outcome of the upcoming conference of the parties to the Convention of Biological Diversities, climate change adaptation, the carbon pricing. So a lot of questions, the technical dialogue is going on, and it's very positive. But we need, let's say, broader engagement, and it is important that Minister Lavrov, he expressed the desire to start, let's say, constructive dialogue on the whole complex of problems dividing the Russian Federation and the European Union. And even if you remember, he proposed to make an audit of, let's say, prospective areas for discussions, exchange of views between the European Union and the Russian Federation. I think we are not, we should not miss this critical opportunity to resume dialogue. Of course, there could be some questions related to the past. Some of them were enumerated in the speech of our colleagues today. But what I appreciate that there is an expression of or understanding of psychological difficulties and other kind of difficulties which accompanied this complex transformation of the former Soviet Union and the space which is called now CIS space. And transformation of the former Soviet Union, somebody called it geopolitical catastrophe. And the repercussions of this dissolution would be felt during decades. And to improve or correct this process of transformation, I'm sure we need collective endeavors on both sides, on the side of the European Union and on the side of Russian Federation, because it is now, let's say, collective endeavor, how to make this process, which could be lasted for decades. You remember that formation of the European Union took decades now. It's more than 70 years, starting from the time of Second World War. And still the process continues. I mean, the process of formation of the European Union with all these ups and downs, and who knows how many years it will take also to finalize the process. So it means that we should understand the underlying difficulties of this transformation, which is now accompanied by modernization of economies, by technical, by total change of new technological breakthrough, new technological environment, new security environment, because we shouldn't forget that these technological changes in the world are accompanied by appearance of multiple crises in Africa, in Asia, practically everywhere, and even in the former Soviet Union countries. And the proof of this is the recent conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So it means that the process of transformation is really painful, and we need patience, and we need understanding, and maybe we need collective endeavor to harmonize this process for the sake of security in Europe. I'm sure about this. Of course, there are other problems we could contribute to solve them through resuming dialogue on security questions, maybe also to utilize OSCE and structural dialogue on security questions as a platform for discussion of this in the absence of a proper platform between the European Union and the Russian Federation. Of course, we could think about giving large-scale legal status to OSCE, and it would help to, let's say, to arrange efficient contribution on the part of OSCE to the process of rapprochement between the European Union and the Russian Federation on many issues, because OSCE has so-called baskets on key questions of cooperation, and it could be utilized for the sake of, let's say, political rapprochement. Also, we could think about maybe giving some sort of a proper dimension to the cooperation between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. Because if you know, the Eurasian Economic Union embraces different countries of the former Soviet Union, and the key countries are participating in this economic integration union. Why not to have full diplomatic recognition of the Eurasian Economic Union? Because then we would harmonize through this the divide between geopolitics and geoeconomics. And we would neutralize the question of, let's say, choice, that one countries, they aspire to be a member of European Union, other would like to continue their membership in Eurasian Union. Harmonization of relations would help to eradicate this, let's say, division. And we'll start harmonization of the process of these relations through embracing both political and economic dimensions. So it's a lot to do, but I am sure that small steps could lead to a big breakthrough in our relationship. And we shouldn't disregard the utility and necessity to continue waging technical dialogue on many issues, but we should add to this dimension, political dimension also, irrespective of the fact that we have a lot of problems, but we should start this process with understanding that this is now absolute priority for both European Union and the Russian Federation. So with this, I would like to terminate my contribution. So thanks a lot.
And thank you very much, Ambassador Scherbak. Also for your many suggestions that you make and many comments. I'm looking forward if maybe some of the other of your colleagues might want to react on that in their contributions as well, or maybe some questions will later come up to that. But we will leave the questions for later, as I mentioned. And so now I'm delighted to give the floor to Ambassador Delcourt. I am pleased that you're here with us today.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for organizing this webinar on this fascinating topic. Let me start by saying that, like Europe, Russia is facing the contemporary strategic upheaval. After the collapse of Cold War the Cold War duopoly. And after the American strategic domination, we are now faced with a new strategic confrontation between an America that is kind of running out of steam, but retains strong assets, and a China claiming a major role, which does not necessarily mean domination. Like Europe, Russia is becoming a side piece to some extent. It can be an ally or a stake, but it will remain marginalized in this opposition. And finally, although a global power, Russia must strive to change the game so that it becomes a strategic actor. But while Europe is destabilized by the loss of its centrality in the eyes of Washington, Russia is kind of used to strategic solitude. It is true that it is always careful to remain a kind of a relevant interlocutor of the United States, and it kind of overplay its former superpower assets. But the rise of China as a major adversary gives Moscow, I think, different cards to play. Certainly in the short term, Moscow will remain in the BRICS camp to maintain a useful relation with many non-Western countries. And this allows it to make its mark on China via the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and to continue the dialogue with India while trying to develop its own network. But the gradual disappearance of the Western Front and the solitary policy of the United States, the rise of resentment against China, which is stiffening, open up many possibilities for Moscow, I believe. This opening up of the game will allow Russia to forge new relationships, as it's already the case with the Gulf states, and may be the case with Europe. But Moscow still needs to put on a friendlier face. The recovery of Russian power after the disastrous decade of the 1990s has been achieved by asserting its muscles and by a practice that can be qualified as brutal. The harshness of Russian relation is also expressed externally. This brutality is shocking in Europe, where people have become accustomed to more respectful relations. It is true that nowadays some international actors have adopted some kind of diplomatic brutality, which would make Russia less exceptional. However, if it handles strategic rhetoric perfectly, it still displays attitudes that weaken its position. The attacks on opponents, the Skripal or the Navalny affair, crude attempts at espionage are deeply altering Russia's image. Those who distrust it are reinforced in their hostility. Those who try to bring it closer are at loss. Many of our leaders are kind of in favor of opening a new page with Moscow. President Macron tried, but his efforts were poorly rewarded. The Kremlin shows a kind of negligence, or I even say a lack of control, that is difficult to understand, especially in view of the strategic finesse practiced elsewhere. Talking with Moscow is complicated because it is necessary to maintain some kind of balance of power and at the same time to show a desire for a dialogue. In the long term, however, I believe that it is in Europe's interest to have a fresh look on relation with Russia. As the United States move away, as China becomes more assertive, it seems necessary to find a new dialogue with Moscow, however difficult this may be. And I know by experience that Russia prefers to have bilateral relation with EU member states rather than talking to the EU as such. The EU is not the favorite partner of Russia. Let's face it. Now, I would like to here mention, I think, a key concept for our relationship with Russia, which would be actually around two words: talking, of dialogue, if you like, and firmness. One has to be firm, of course, and has been firm on the EU side after the annexation of Crimea, after the poisoning cases, after the issue in Belarus. And France and Germany, to mention two leading member states of the EU, have sent soldiers to the Baltic states as part of the NATO reinforced forward presence. The French and the Germans have agreed on the fight against cyber attacks and information manipulation. They share the determination to protect human rights and the inviolability of borders. Far from being naive, the French position, as presented in 2021 strategic update, described Russia, quote, as an opportunistic and agile power, unquote, with which it is necessary to, quote, reopen a lucid dialogue, unquote. Secondly, the French and the German selective cooperation with Russia takes place in many areas: the economy, the space, the culture, the science, meeting our health. I mean, we are actually cooperating with our Russian partners on environment, on the nuclear negotiation with Iran, on the fight against terrorism. The dialogue with Russia on the Ukrainian conflict remains, in any case, necessary. The same applies to the Caucasus, Belarus, Syria, and Libya. And thirdly, there is a development which is emerging, namely in Germany. There are voices arguing that in the face of challenges, one should not only react, but develop a strategic vision. I like to quote here Norbert Röttgen, the chairman of the Bundestag Committee on Foreign Relations, saying Germany must be less reactive and more proactive in dealing with major challenges. When in June 2019, the question of Russia reintegration into the Council of Europe arose, Germany and France worked together in favor of this reintegration. On the 18th of November 2020, Foreign Minister Le Drian and Maas signed a joint article in Le Monde, in which, seeing China as the greatest challenge, they argued for a stronger Europe in a rebalanced partnership with the US. But they added, and I'm quoting here, and on all issues affecting European security, we are ready to exchange with Moscow, and we expect Russia to provide constructive answers. It is true that after a meeting with President Putin in Moscow in January 2020, Chancellor Merkel said, it is better to talk to each other than to talk about each other. Let us not forget that the Franco-German couple has constantly been remarkable for its ability to overcome its differences in order to move Europe forward. The relationship with Russia once again questioned this ability. Indeed, we must ask ourselves whether, on the one hand, Europe will be able to overcome its division in order to establish a lucid dialogue with Russia, and whether, on the other hand, Russia will consider it as a partner capable of engaging this dialogue. The aftermath of the Navalny affair and the casual treatment of Joseph Borrell in Moscow last February raised the question. The risk with the new configuration of the Biden administration is that at some point a strategic dialogue will be established between Russia and the United States over the heads of these united Europeans, or with the Europe reduced to the role of follower. In conclusion, let us observe that during the Cold War, with more glaring differences than today, and under the totalitarian regime in the Soviet Union, dialogue led to the Helsinki Final Declaration of 1975, which helped to ease tension, but had another than unexpected result. Commentators saw the Helsinki agreement as a success for the Eastern Bloc, valuing the first two baskets on the status quo in Europe and on the economic cooperation, and judging the third basket on human rights and human exchange as insignificant. Yet, it was this basket, the third basket, that had the greatest effects in the Soviet space and contributed to its demise. The strategic dialogue with Russia can also help, I believe, to nurture a desire for Europe in some of the younger generation in Russia, among the media, a desire that can lead to other unexpected developments. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Delcourt, for your expertise, input, and your contribution and your perspective on that. Yes, you can all hear me, sorry. And yeah, now I am very pleased to give the floor to Ambassador Franco. Welcome to you once again. We can hear you and we can also see you. That's perfect.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yes.
That's okay. No, thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's a great pleasure to participate with this very important and interesting series of speakers. I did agree with a lot of things that have been said before, among others by Ambassador Delcourt, about the need for reopening dialogue. And I also am very happy that you put kind of China in the picture, because I do think that the policy vis-à-vis China is a very important background in all geopolitical thinking, also in our relations with Russia. But I would like to focus now on Russia itself and try to understand why things are happening that are happening now, and how we can get out of the present deadlocked situation. And therefore, I think it's always useful to look back to the past and try to understand why Russia is acting the way it is acting. That does not mean that you necessarily approve of the policies, but at least a good understanding of why it happens, what the perception is on the other side of the problems that we're facing. I think this is a precondition for better formulating a policy to contain and also possibly to de-escalate the present tension situation. And I think it is important that we go beyond the focus that we have very often on the conflict in Ukraine, because 2014 is not a starting point, is not the beginning of a deterioration of relations. It is perhaps a point of culmination. And it looks in certain instances like a bit of a breaking point. And what we're discussing today is, let's say, how can we operate? What can we do in order to avoid that indeed it becomes a breaking point, that it becomes a point of no return? And I would argue that the relationship between Russia and the West is a kind of a story of unfulfilled expectations on both sides, and that we have to understand why these expectations came into being and why they are unfulfilled. At the end of the Cold War, at the end of the bipolar world order, there was this expectation that Russia would integrate a kind of what we call international community, but international community Western style that is dominated by the United States. And this, in fact, is formalized in the Paris Charter for a New Europe of 1990, where the keywords are parliamentary democracy, human rights, market economy, cooperation in Europe. This, I think, is an important document that also kind of formulates the expectation that was at that moment in Europe, Western Europe, in the West and in Russia on the future of the relationships after the end of the Cold War. Now, Western expectations were not fulfilled. And although Russia in the early Yeltsin days was indeed following the guidelines of the new Europe Paris Charter, it started changing about the mid-90s. Very often it is linked with the arrival of Evgeny Primakov as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and later as Prime Minister. You can already see it in the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement between Russia and the European Union. This was in fact signed in 2004, but it took about 3 years to be ratified. And it's interesting to see why it took so long. It took so long because there was this increasing feeling in Russia that it was taking sovereignty away from Russia, because the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement expresses very clearly the intention that Russia would adjust its whole legal and political and economic framework to Western standards, in particular European Union standards. This is even explicitly said in Article 55 of that agreement, where it is said that Russia will align its legal system with the European one. That created a lot of frustration on the Yeltsin side, because Russia considered itself to be a great nation, a sovereign nation, and in the years, and I was in the period, I was in Russia in the period 2004-2009, and the sentence "Don't lecture us" was possibly the sentence that I most heard during my time there. And 2007, Putin's intervention in the Munich Security Conference spells it out very clearly. Russia is a great country. Russia has its own interests, has its own of influence, is going to pursue its own interests, and is no longer to play the game. It's drawing a kind of a line under the intentions of the Paris Charter for a New Europe. Words like sovereign democracy are more and more frequent in the Russian discourse, as well as this Russian form of state capitalism that developed. So this was then further in security terms complicated by the Georgian conflict, the gas conflict in 2006 and 2009, and the Ukrainian conflict, of course. They're just episodes, in fact, of this growing splits where Russia insists on its own sovereignty, where Russia insists on its own status as a great nation, and wants to underline this. Now, the West was, of course, very much disappointed in the fact that these expectations were not fulfilled, but also on the Russian side, of course, and this is something that we have to understand, the Russian expectations were not fulfilled. First of course, economically, there was this idea that by introducing market economy and market capitalism, that situation would improve very quickly. Of course, we all know that the reverse happened, and that for 10, 15 years, in Russia, the standard of living was falling. The people were getting very miserable. They were kind of very nostalgic for the Soviet period. That not was brilliant, but at least has a kind of a stability in it. And so the collapse of the economy was accompanied by the collapse of Russia as a great nation. Russia fell, lost its status as a regional and a global power, Russia expected at the beginning an overhaul of the European security infrastructure, that the Cold War machine NATO had to be dismantled or reorganized. This, of course, did not happen. And we all know that in the context of the agreements of German unification, some promises were made about eastward expansion of NATO that were not kept. This was for a long time kind of denied on the Western side, but I think that the archives of the State Department prove the respect that Russia was indeed, could indeed expect that the West would not expand NATO 1 inch more to the east, as I think it was Baker who said it. And this NATO and EU expansion, the former Soviet republics, was considered an attack on the integrity of Russia and its sphere of influence. So also the European neighborhood policy and in particular, Eastern Partnership was considered by Russia to be aggressive oriented against Russia, where European neighborhood and near abroad was overlapping. And I think we underestimated or neglected for a long time, and probably still do, the fact that this is very sensitive in Russia, and this is part of the Russian narrative on the West is trying to destroy us. And this narrative, the West is trying to destroy us, is a kind of the feeding factor into a lot of Russian policies. I'm not saying that they are right. I'm not saying that I agree with this. I'm just saying that this is the perception on the Russian side, and that we have to take into account with this perception the fact that Russia is kind of has lost its status, tries to regain the status, and feels that the West is not really respecting Russia as a regional and global power. Just to quote Medvedev a couple of weeks ago, who was talking about the present situation, comparing it with the Cold War, saying at the Cold War, at least the West did respect Russia, which is no longer the case. So again, I'm not saying that I agree. I'm only saying that this is a perception, and we should take into account this perception. At this moment, of course, we have the respective narratives that increasingly are going opposite directions. The slogan is on the West, on the Russian side is the West wants to destroy Russia. On the Western side is Russia tries to destroy Western democracies. And interfere in the Western political system. Correct or not correct, but these kind of narrative exist, and this is part of a perception on both sides that we have to take into account. Western criticism of Russian external and domestic policies are easily swept away, are not really pursued in a dialogue, because Russia would quote double standards on the Western side, and would use a what about argument. Whatever the West would kind of criticize Russia for, Russia would say, what about? If we say you change the borders of Europe by annexing Crimea, then the Russian would say, what did you do with Kosovo? And so on and so forth. I mean, this is a totally useless dialogue, because it is like they say in English, when you're in a hole, stop digging. I think we're in a hole, and we're both on both sides digging. So we have to try and move forward. Now, how can we move forward? And I think here I will agree with a number of things that have been said before by various previous speakers. But I would like to make one note that applies to everything that I'm going to say now. I think the present situation is not possibly the best situation or the best context for launching a really negotiation, because Russia is moving to an election in September, and various indications are that the Kremlin or the ruling elite is not completely at ease with this outcome of these elections, and this will interfere with dialogue and with possible openings and with possible initiatives of improving the situation, of de-escalating the conflict. But I think what is important that we have to realize that Russia wants to be recognized and respected as a regional and a world power. Now, it is up to us in the West now to analyze this and see what is it. This is a reality that Russia pursues. Now, what can we accept? What can we not accept? How far can we go? And what should we do in order to take this as a starting point and go further? And of course, there are a number of things that we will have to accept, even if we don't like them, because we will not be able to change them. To change them, you would kind of need a military intervention. Russia is what it is, and we'll have to, as I said, analyze very clearly what is it that we can accept, what kind of things can we work with, what kind of things can we live with, and where should we totally, let's say, be in opposition and try to change them. So, as many people have said before, we have to look for issues of common interest and collaborate in a constructive spirit, and trying to create a process that creates a sphere of confidence. What, in my opinion, leads to a first thing is that we would not really tackle the hard security issues from the beginning, because that is where the main conflict lies. But as it has been said before, there are many issues where we have a common interest, and also in the three-pronged strategy of Borrell, there is engage on issues of common concern, which is already part of the 5 points of the 26 European EU principles in its relations with Russia. So let's look on where we can engage on a common agenda, on common interests. Perhaps we could look at what the US did. The Biden-Putin summit, they talked for a long time. Biden told what he thought was wrong with Russia. Putin replied in the usual manner. And then they concentrate, so they agreed to disagree on these issues. And then they concentrate on two issues that were of common concern. When Biden said, look, there is something wrong with cybersecurity and your country is not behaving appropriately, he didn't say that it was the Putin who did it. He said that in the country things are happening and you better do something about it, because otherwise you might get a kind of an American reaction to this. Putin said, okay, let's look at it together. Let's have some experts work on the cybersecurity. Secondly, start. We both have an interest in limiting the race for developing atomic weapons. Let's put some experts together and talk about this. This is possibly the main American preoccupation. Russia is a global power. Russia is a global power because it has nuclear weapons, and a lot of nuclear weapons. Russia is not a world power because of economic reasons. I mean, to put it provocatively, Russia economically is not much bigger than the Benelux. So the importance of Russia is not because it's economically important, because it has nuclear weapons. So for the Americans, it's important that this is kind of put under control. Now, in the same way, we can look at what interests the European Union.
May I ask you to conclude? Sorry? May I ask you to conclude?
My conclusion is here that we have a number of issues that we can work on. Among other things, the health has been mentioned in climate. What also is, of course, an area of concern is economic, because we both are very important economic partners in contrast to the relations between the United States and Russia. Cooperation at a political level with the Eurasian Economic Union has already been mentioned. I think could be an important step also to create, let's say, a confidence between the two sides that can then lead at a later stage, when the confidence is being reestablished, to have a real good discussion on the security issues. Okay, I will stop here.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. We also have our last guest.
No, I understand. I'm sorry for being a bit long-winded.
And I also want to give the floor to participants for their questions. Okay, so without further break, I invite Mr. Védrine for his contribution.
Oui, bonjour. First of all, very happy to participate in this panel. I will try to be short, between 5-10 minutes, because I want a debate after that. First of all, I think if we want to start a constructive dialogue, we have to escape from this attitude of, Russian fanatism and Russia phobia, you know. I think the two parts of this sickness is not very efficient for dialogue. In Russia, they say that the West is in kind of Russophobia process, and but also we have some Russian fanatism. I can say that if, for example, when I give an interview, I say you like France, okay, you can like France and you can not like Macron. You can like US and be against Biden. And I think For Russia, this is the same. We can like Russia and we can be against Putin and Putin's system. That means we have to escape from this emotional attitude and to speak about Russia like a normal state, like US, like France, like Germany. Russia is a normal state, and we have to escape from any emotional attitude. That's really, I think, this is first step for a dialogue to be rational. Now for democracy, I was very happy to hear the first speech from the Baltic state. Yes, we are waiting for democracy in Russia, and I think it's very important that all Europe will be under democratic system and some common values. But I must say that I think we lost a big chance at the beginning of the 90s, because at the beginning of the 90s, Russia was on the way for a democracy, and the West and at first EU didn't understand what was going on. And EU didn't help in the 90s, in the beginning of the 90s, Russia to go to a democracy. And Russia in the beginning of the 90s needed the help of EU because really quickly, without our help, this democratic experience became like anarchy and kleptocracy experience. And that's why after that Putin came in the power, because we lost this chance at the beginning of the 90s to support really this way of democratic Russia. Now, for democracy in Russia, I think we have to be very careful. What that means? That means I am chief editor of a Russian monitor with a Russian newspaper of the Russian non-systemic opposition. All my teams are Russian. Okay, I have Russian roots, and all of them, I can say, think that this is to the Russian to do a democracy with the support of the West. But the West, you know, we can see in this attitude of dialogue, the West now, and EU the first, really sometime the West doesn't understand the Russian mentality. And I think democracy in Russia first will come from the Russians themselves, with some support of the West, but not with the, can say, some big influence of the West, because the Russians are very proud of their country and want to do themselves their way to democracy with the support of the West. But I repeat, with support, that's mean not with a big influence, like not with a Soros phone, for example. Now, the second speech was very interesting from the ambassador of the Russian Federation. Yes, Russia needs with EU some cooperation, and yes, to build this Eurasian space. I totally agree. That was also the dream of the General de Gaulle, from the Atlantic to the Ural. But I repeat, we can do that, but we are waiting from Russia some respect of democracy, human rights, and like the Navalny case and all that. This dialogue is a need. Because China, because USA is declining, and China is really for the world a threat. And also, we need this dialogue, but we cannot have this dialogue now if we don't solve the war in Ukraine. The annexation of Crimea is against international law. The war in Donbass is a war between Russia and Ukraine. If we not solve the Ukraine war, we will not start a dialogue. Then I think we have to revive the Minsk agreement, we have to revise some talks in the Minsk group, Normandy format, between Germany, Ukraine, Russia, and France. I think without a solution for Ukraine, we cannot start a new dialogue. It's a key point, and I think Russia must do some effort in this way, like in Donbass for the elections, and we cannot imagine elections in Donbass without a total control of Ukraine in Donbass, control of the borders. And that's the key point. We cannot do elections in Donbass if Ukraine will not control Donbass, and that's the key point. And we know that Russia is a guest. Russia wants to do the election, and after they will see if they will give the control to Ukraine. This is impossible. Ukraine must control Donbass and after organize the election. Then this dialogue can start only if we find a solution for this war in Ukraine. I am a little bit afraid for this summer, because we spoke about the elections in September. And I think for internal and domestic reason, I think Putin will need some, can say, victory. And I think we have to be very focused on what will happen in Belarus this August, before the elections in Russia. I think we need this dialogue, but Russia needs to do some efforts to speak clearly. And to solve at first problem in Ukraine, annexation of Crimea, war in Donbass is really a key point to start a dialogue. We have to solve this problem. I am very happy because this panel is very interesting, because we escape from emotional attitude. And I hope we will have other panels like that, because we need to speak. And as I said, for example, for Ukraine, we need to revive the Minsk summit, and we need to really discuss, because without that, we will go back to very emotional attitude. And I think everything must be more rational, and we have to speak with Russia like we speak with the normal state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur Vedrine. Now, because we have our last 15 minutes, I would like to invite the participants to ask questions. Finally, I know that there was one question from the very beginning. Please go ahead. You can be first. It's Ms. Trabelsi. Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me in, and thank you for this very interesting discussion. So I would have two questions, actually, and one of them is more like a remark. It was about what Mr. Delcourt has said and other panelists, and about China. I do think that the problem that the EU is facing with Russia, and what makes it very difficult to interact, is that the conflicts raised with Russia are geographically complex. That means they are in the EU, in Europe, and they are outside Europe. Not like China. China, I mean, the confrontation between the EU and China is more in other places of the world, like Africa. But for Russia, we see the problems with Ukraine. We see the problems with Nord Stream 2, which is the gas pipeline. But we see also confrontation when it comes to Libya and now in Afghanistan with all which is happening lately. So that's a major point that the panelists could probably add more to that. And just a question, it was from the beginning of Mr. Kubilius. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but he talked about Russia being more democratic so that the relationships with the EU would get better. But what we are seeing is that sanctions do not work with Russia. And Putin, in his last interview after his meeting with President Biden, he wasn't really bothered about sanctions, about Navalny. So I don't think that wait until Russia, I mean, the Russian government, not the people, but the Russian government gets more democratic and open would be a concrete solution to improve the relationships with them? Thank you.
May I answer? Yeah, I will try to be very brief. Good question, but we need to have clear vision of our long-term strategy. What we want to achieve in our, in our neighborhood, in our eastern part of the European continent, and we need to answer a very simple question: do we believe that Russia can become a democracy or not? If we believe, and I believe, then it's one choice. Putin, at least what I see now, is trying to convince all of us that Russia is a special case and never will become a democracy, and that we simply need to adapt to Putin, to his behavior, to his policies, and so on. If we believe that Russia can become a democracy, I absolutely agree with Oliver that Russian people will make democracy happen with our assistance, and our assistance needs to come now with very clear conditions, conditionality. Yes, we can have dialogue with Putin administration on some important issues, but we need to put very clear conditionality. I agree with possibility of Merkel and Macron dialogue with Putin if I would know what they are going to say on Ukraine, on Navalny, on Belarus. If they will send very clear messages, then it's really a good opportunity to speak with Putin. I do not believe that Putin will change himself. That's again what we need to understand. But what is changing in Russia is the same what was changing in Belarus, what we saw last year. People want the change. After 20 or 26 years of authoritarian regime, they want the change. Now, of course, authoritarian regimes are fighting against, but history is on the side of those who want the change and who want democracy. So the same is happening in Russia. People are starting to show that they want to change. They want the change. Putin administration is fighting against that. The question is on which side we are standing. And what does it mean, and how we can help Russian people with their demand and unconditional dialogue, per se, as a goal for you to have dialogue. Now I hear, quite a lot of those, statements. We need to have dialogue with Putin, on what issues, with what goal. Nobody talks very much, about that. Unconditional dialogue with Putin would be against exactly, this long-term vision that Russia can become a democracy. Let's have very clear conditional dialogue, with having in mind that we want, to see that Russian people will get what we have, democracy at the end. And Russia will be a very, 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 very nice and very good country. We love Russian people. But for time being, it's that stage where we need to look how to help them.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kubilius. It was pretty much clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If anybody from the other speakers would like to make a contribution or would like to answer to that question too, you may. Otherwise, I will get to the next question. Okay. Then I see Ms. Maisurada. I cannot see your entire name. I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists for their insightful and interesting remarks. My question concerns the transatlantic strategy towards Russia, and to what extent is it possible and feasible, and what would be the acceptable means to have such kind of strategy? I mean, also US was mentioned during the discussion and the Biden-Putin summit. So especially considering the Eastern Partnership region, I mean, there is not a single Eastern partner country where Russia is not present, either with the conventional or non-conventional means. So how could EU have a joint transatlantic strategy with US towards Russia? Thank you.
Is this question to a special person? Otherwise, yeah, I will just give the floor to Mr. Vedrin because he's already raising hands. Please go ahead.
few very quickly. Now, I think in this transatlantic policy, Russia is not a Russia and Europe is not a key in for US. When I speak with some US political scientists, they say now our target is China, and you can see what's happened now. They are leaving Afghanistan. They permitted Nord Stream 2 to open. I think now US will be less and less active in Europe and more active in Asia, because China is the biggest problem. And for us, this is a chance. This is a chance for the European, really, to be European, to be more united, to be more strong, and to speak with Russia without other influence. And we have to take the chance that, and this is also the result of the Biden and Putin summit, that now for US, Europe is not very important. And US want Russia to be neutral if they have some problem with China. And this is a chance for us to start really to be European. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you. Ambassador Igor Sherbak, would you like to, what is your take on the question? If you would like to answer to one of the questions, you're most welcome to, because I'm addressing you directly because I have the impression you're the only Russian perspective that we have in here, and I would very much like to have the answers also balanced. So please feel free to contribute whenever you feel comfortable, of course, also. We cannot hear you. You're muted in case you speak.
Yes. I agree with Mr. Verdun concerning absolute priority of Europeans be Europeans, and we shouldn't miss this critical opportunity to, let's say, to have a real cooperation. So it's, I think, with this I could I could agree. It's very important, but also we need now to have some, let's say, consultative mechanism to discuss some, let's say, thoroughly political issues, I mean, foreign policy issues, some crisis management, because the report of the Commission mentioned that there is constructive engagement between the European Union and Russia concerning the Middle East process, Libya, and Iranian nuclear deal. But what is needed now in time of turbulence and the complexity of the strategic environment, and some contradictions, or let's say, which could be raised in the result of this competition between the US and China, to have some consultative mechanism for crisis management in Africa, because a lot of crises are going on, and let's see, it proves the fact that alone European Union can't be able to set the crisis without some sort of common policy approaches and contributions from other sides. Suppose, let's take, for example, the recent conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Now, what is needed, some sort of a conception of post-conflict resurrection of economy of both countries, because they suffered a lot of damages, economical, humanitarian, and so on and so forth. And for this, we need some platform to discuss these, let's say, issues of paramount political importance for both. So I think in this direction. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I still see one hand up. Yeah, Mr. Ludovic Joas, it's your turn. You may ask.
Thank you. I have a question related to, like, we talked a lot during this panel about democracy and its promotion to rebuild the dialogue between Europe and Russia. And I truly think that would be a start, because I truly think that's one strength of the politics of European Union abroad is its ability to foster its political model. But I would like to raise the question about how we deal with the question of democracy inside Europe, because I feel I have the feeling that we will lack some political credibility with our discussion with Russia if we don't mitigate our democratic problem that we have inside the European Union. I have in mind the situation in Poland and in Hungary, and I think I would like to know what the participant of the panel think about this question, how we can deal with how we can promote democracy inside the European Union, and how it can help us develop, foster our value outside. Because I think I have the feeling that we talk about European democracy as if it's something already done and not something we can strengthen.
Thanks. I would maybe direct this question either to Mr. Kubilius or Ambassador de Accord, or also, of course, Ambassador Franco. Volunteers? Yes, please go ahead, Ambassador Franco.
Okay, let me volunteer to reply to this. I think it's indeed a very difficult topic. And this is in the series of the Russian replies, what about? We can criticize lack of press freedom in Russia, and they will say, what about the laws in Hungary? What about the laws in Poland? It means that the European Union and I mean, we get a little bit lost in our own narrative and in our own speeches, because the reality is that in terms of respect of human rights, freedom of expression, independence of the judiciary, and so on and so forth, that we score increasingly badly. Our way of handling migration is not, let's say, a very pure humanitarian textbook example, or perhaps it is, but then in the wrong way. We have restrictions of human rights and freedoms, not just in Poland and Hungary, but in a number of other European countries. So if we want to have a real dialogue with Russia about these things, we better get our act together first. Otherwise, we will not get beyond the first sentence, because the Russians will say, what about? And that stops the discussion, and that makes it completely, let's say, useless.
Okay, and in your mind, what we could do to foster those values inside the European Union? Because I think it will strengthen our position.
It's a very good question. I would say it's the task of all of us, Democrats who believe in democracy, that we and the political parties and our governments and so on and so forth work in order to make this indeed happen. And what happens in Poland and Hungary can only be overturned if the Polish people and the Hungarian people, if the citizens in their elections vote the present regimes out. And let's hope that there are not too many following them. I mean, what would happen next year if you have in the French elections a runoff between President Macron and Madame Le Pen? I mean, you never know how this is going to happen. If you look at the situation almost in each and every member state, you always have very strong right-wing parties who are on the verge of taking power, and at least very strongly influence the line of the government. I mean, in my own country, Belgium, in my own region, Flanders, the biggest party is an ultra right-wing nationalist, anti-migration, racist party, full stop. This is close to, it's between 25 and 30%. And it is the biggest party. So that means by next time around, by the elections, they will be in charge of forming the government. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, or whether I have to move my home from here to somewhere else. I mean, we have to take this seriously. So rather than go on and on and on about democracy in Russia, perhaps we should spend a little bit more time about talking and working about democracy in our own countries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, maybe one last comment from Ambassador Delcourt, and then because I'm really sorry, but we're running out of time. So one last comment, and then yeah.
Just thank you. Just a few seconds. Of course, I'm in line with what the previous speaker said. However, I want to add really that the power of attraction of the EU remains extremely strong outside of the EU. And one should not go too much into soul searching about Hungary or Poland when you look at what's happening in Russia or other countries. So I see in the Balkan, I see, including in the public opinion of Russia, a real interest for what we call the EU values. These are strong in spite of what's happening in some countries. And once again, I do believe that what makes the EU strong is precisely the values we are defending. Thank you.
Can I add one more word? Because I mean, the EU as of power of attraction, because the first question was also about territorial disputes in Ukraine and in the Caucasus. I just wanted to make a remark about what Ambassador Delcourt said about the power of attraction. Let's not forget that the main accomplishment of the European integration process is that our own tribal wars between France and Germany had been stopped, and that nobody at this moment could even imagine that there would be a kind of a conflict, armed conflict between France and Germany, although we had about 3 in less than 1 century. The power of the European Union as a model is a power of getting people to give up looking past and to the past and history and talk about territorial disputes and look together in future to what they can do together. And this is kind of the model. This is the message that we have to bring. Unfortunately, we tend to forget it a little bit too much ourselves.
Thanks for emphasizing and for making that point. I know this is a really interesting topic, and we could probably go on and discuss on it. Yes?
Just one comment, if you allow me to do this. I think I consider today's webinar is extremely important and quite interesting. Maybe we could continue this in another setting offline when this COVID-19 finally would be terminated. So it would be desirable to continue this exercise, maybe with participation of institutions, other institutions, and so forth. So just not to give up and continue this exercise, because it is extremely useful and important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your suggestion, Ambassador Igor Sherbak. We will definitely take this into account. Of course, it would be nice to continue in this setup or in a different one, extended one. And yes, hopefully Corona situation will soon allow it. Yes, then I will give the floor to Mr. Mallows for some wrapping up and final remarks.
Thank you very much. And I thank also in the name of Vocal Europe. Thank you, Julia. I thank all the participants, distinguished speaker. Just one very short comment, first of all, on the last debate. I would just remind everybody that the European project was built by the founder fathers and mothers in the 50s on the idea of freedom. Freedom of free nations would decide democratically to transfer the sovereignty to a community of free nation, a community for freedom. And we should never forget that. That means, of course, we have common values, but we see that sometimes there's an abuse of this idea of common values, and we want to impose a way of life, society's problem, where in each country they have difference in history, different tradition, different culture, respect of religion. And I would say that the European project is also the project of respecting the values, respecting the identity, respecting the culture of the various nations. And so sometimes we forgot about that, and we mixed European values and global, world values, which is something different. We have a tradition, we have our roots, and we have to also to respect our roots. Now coming to the question of you and Russia, I think we have very interesting idea, very interesting comments. I think that there are some stereotype in the mind of Russians, don't speak about government, but Russian and Europeans, and there is still a kind of, I would say, Cold War, Iron Curtain in the mind. And I think the stereotype from the Russian side is that the West want to destroy Russia, disintegrate the Russian nation, and in the same time, the myth in the mind of some West Europeans, mainly the one who are close to Russia, is the idea that we would like to see Russia joining the Occidental, the West world, as General de Gaulle wanted in '63, the UK in Europe, that means all naked. Je veux l'Angleterre toute nue, say the General de Gaulle. So we have to respect it. So the wish of the Russian nations to keep their sovereignty and to keep their strength. We don't want to weak Russia and to disintegrate. So if we are able to overcome these two myths, to organize to support a kind of reconciliation, as we did between French and German, this will help. Not question about government. And we had, and I will quote what Ambassador Delcourt say very rightly, we have tools. Tools is the OSCE as it was. The tools is the Council of Europe, nobody mentioned that, which is the institution for the values, for human rights and values, where Russia and the European Union belong. And we have the European Union. I will just finish my comment to say that I deeply regret that during the last European Council, of course, it was not well prepared, but the proposition of French and German to have a EU-Russia summit has not been accepted. Because, dear colleague from EPP, you know that talks are taking account between French and Russian, between German and Russian. It's much better to have these talks at the European Union level, so then it's open, frank, and transparent, than to have this dialogue on each side from one country to the other. So I think dialogue doesn't mean dialogue for dialogue. Dialogue means the way to tell the things and to make the things going forward. So this was the purpose of that webinar, and as a colleague from Russia proposed, I think it will be very, very useful to continue to go forward. Thank you very much to everybody, and to you, Julia, for your excellent work.
Thank you very much to all of you, and also for staying longer. I'm so sorry that we're exceeding on the time, but it was really very interesting and very enriching. So thank you very much to the participants, to the nice questions, and especially to our guest speakers. Thanks a lot. And I hope that we will get the chance and the opportunity to exchange again on another occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.